the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next up is our consent agenda. There was a document for meeting minutes, draft meeting minutes in the packet. There was also 2 warrants. There is a slight amount change to the payroll warrant that you will see as you sign it. It's just a difference of a couple $100, and we will get that changed in the packet. Looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. Catherine, Bill. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Next up is public comment. A reminder that public comment, we're good on Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
A reminder that public comment for any item or topic on or off the agenda is always available near the top of the agenda for individuals to share their thoughts. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes per person. Please use public comment even if you refer to something later on the agenda. Virtual public comment is available through Zoom. Please raise your hand and you'll be promoted to panelist unmuted, or coming up to the microphone to introduce yourself in the room. So we'll just give that a minute to see.
Yeah, we've nobody on. We've got one. You want me to know one?
Yep,
Okay.
we'll go to a virtual virtual public comment. Okay, we see a hand on Zoom and we are unmuting. Please introduce yourself and then.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Megan Eckroth. 8 Timberley Lane. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you, Megan.
Zoom as I'm speaking.
Yeah, we can hear you, Megan.
Okay. Thank you. I live at 8 Timberley Lane. I'm a parent of WA student as well as a 4th grade teacher in the district. I am coming to speak tonight because recently it was my understanding that when students who are still Westford residents choose to leave our district and attend a different school, that there's currently no sort of exit survey or interview or questions to speak of asked of these families. Given the upcoming budget concerns and the fact that we will likely be having an override on our ballot to ask Westford residents to support all of our town services, which of course includes schools, I'd like to request of the administration that they give some consideration to administering such an exit survey, if you will. The numbers of students choosing to leave our district to attend private schools or technical schools or parochial schools or any other high school, frankly, other than WA, have been on the rise, and the only numbers, my understanding that we track is the enrollment at WestfordCAT, as we are a contributing taxpayer to that school in Westford. But that doesn't answer the questions of why. So this piqued my curiosity because, frankly, as a parent, I understand that we are, embarking on conducting this equity audit, and I think it is really valuable information that we could be missing out on when we are looking at a way to improve our students' experience in our schools. To ask not perhaps why they would seek a different school that offers different things, but what is it about the Westford Public Schools, or specifically about WA or the middle schools, that they feel they may not be successful there. I recently posed this question on Facebook, which I know is just a microcosm of feedback, but I was frankly amazed at people's candid responses and the fact that they would be more than willing to answer a survey if one existed, even if it were anonymous and optional. I think this is information that is really valuable to our district to be capturing, to understand what it is that we can do better to help our students feel included, feel successful, and feel that they can thrive in our school system. So I'd just like to put that out there as a consideration.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much.
Any other hands? Anyone in the room for public comment? Okay.
Nothing
Okay,
else.
great. We'll move on to informational updates and the superintendent.
Well, we're going to be talking about a lot of things tonight, and we have a number of different great presentations that we're going to see as well, too. So I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to the artwork in the hallways, right? Our art teachers do a great job circulating and bringing different student work here to central office, but every time it changes, because we'll see it and we'll see the same thing for a couple weeks, but as the new stuff shows up, I think it's great for people to pay attention to. So I just want to encourage all of you to peek as you're walking up and down the halls and look. Right now, it's WA students' work who's up there right now. And then I know you had shared something.
Right, so during last school year, the school committee secured some funding through ARPA funds for the purpose of creating calming kits in each of the elementary schools. And what is being shown behind us right now is an example that's coming from the Miller School. So recently, both the occupational therapy staff and the counseling staff at each of the elementary schools partnered together to figure out what makes sense for their building, for their developmental level, and what they thought would be helpful to the students. So each of these calming kits are being presented to each of the general education classrooms through the ARPA funding that had been secured through the committee. The Miller School, this is just an example, that they included breathing balls, a alphabet book of breathing, some visuals, a feeling wheel, some mindful breathing mazes, different sensory items, both tactile and visual fidgets, some noise reducing headphones, and a visual timer. It's kind of like called a think lava lamp that you flip over. So those are some of the things that were chosen by the Miller School.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, Courtney, are the other schools working on rolling it out too as we speak?
Yes, and some of them might be completed at this time. This was just one that had been shared with us.
Thank you. Next up, school committee updates. Anyone?
Town DEI met last week, and they are working on their multicultural calendar. Very exciting. We saw a preview of what it's looking like. They're currently working on, I think it's March through to June, and because they're going to launch it later on into the year. They also had a motion or a suggestion of revisiting the Columbus Day, which for anybody interested, it was voted down. So that is a discussion that is over with the committee for the time being. They're also very excitedly working with Magali. I think we've spoken or shared this already. The Who We Are movie that as a group we were all invited to is being planned to be shown at Westford Academy in January. It looks like it's January 17th, I believe, is the date. There's a flyer going out right now, and it's in conjunction with both the school DEI group and the town DEI group, and that'll be happening in January, so looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. LPAC met on Thursday. Went really well. I think I took over the agenda a little bit because I started sharing some resources that are available at my organization for newcomers to the U.S., specifically around access to Medicaid and access to other services. So, because Health Law Advocates has a specific immigrant project, so I kind of shared those resources, and so it made me happy because Magali was like, we went through a bunch of different things that are available for newcomers, and so she's like, I'm going to put these on the website. So I felt like that was not really the agenda, but actually what I thought folks said that it was helpful. So it was a really good meeting.
Awesome. Thank you.
Policy met last week, and as we talked about the last meeting, we've been kind of doing this review and have made some updates to policy sourced or original documents that when those get further reviewed later will come through. We talked about that last time, but we looked at some policies we want to focus on. There's a number of policies that deal with things like library materials, selection of materials, curriculum. I'm trying to think of categorizing, teaching about controversial topics, things that are things we're hearing about nationwide in the news, and things that from the conference we attended a session, which we brought home some best practices, some model policies, and we just want to make sure that ours are where they need to be to make sure that we're set up for success in all those areas.
Great. Thanks.
School start times, subcommittee met on Friday. We met again with Jen Piper and, floating some ideas about bus routes and all sorts of, just the nitty gritty and really having some good discussions there. So hopefully as we make our way towards recommendations later in December, possibly January. So.
Okay, thanks. Great, thank you. We'll move on to students.
Yeah, so the Holiday Bazaar was this past Saturday. I know I saw a few of you there. It went very smoothly. We had over 120 vendors and 40 clubs. And I think it was a pretty good success from all the students, advisors, and vendors I talked to.
Last week, HOSA had their blood drive, which I heard went well. This weekend, on the 2nd, same as the bazaar, the SAT was there. So students, I know students came after the SAT and still came to the bazaar. And Miss Benactor just emailed us, emailed seniors telling us we need to buy our cap and gown. There's that. Senior portraits were due Friday, so.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our first item of business, which is the Environmental Leadership Club. So whoever wants to come up to the microphone and. We have some slides that you sent ahead. Yep, so we can work on pulling those up. If you want to introduce yourselves.
They could slide some. Yeah,
Okay. Stretch your legs.
Okay, so we are the Environmental Leadership Club of Stony Brook. Technically, we're alumni because now we're in WA. But same thing. My name is Tanish.
I'm Perry Whitmore.
I'm Ayush Warke.
I'm Ibsham Batra.
And so what we're trying to do tonight is share some of what we've done at Stony Brook and maybe give some recommendations for what might be able to be picked up by the Westford district and other schools going forward.
And also what we can do further to make our district in general more eco-friendly. So this is just like pictures of sad pictures of kind of and like some facts about like what's happening to our planet right now. And
I think we can move on to the next
Yeah.
one. We didn't have anything planned for that one. All right.
so this is on this slide it's showing like what Stony Brook Cafe was before. So right now our like waste is going to incinerators and landfills, and basically what's happening in incinerators is that they're like being set on fire and dangerous toxins are being released into the air. And these are not good for like human health in general, and also the health of our wildlife. And another thing that's being released into the air is carbon dioxide. And in the landfills, the plastics are becoming microplastics that contaminate soil, water, and air. And these microplastics get into our food, which is very unhealthy for like human health. Next slide, please.
Thank you. These are projects that were done last year by the 8th graders at the end of the year for science. We took what we had collected from the cafeterias for however many months we had been doing it. We counted it, and we found some information on how many trays we'd use a year. So at just Stony Brook, about 54,000 of these trays would be used a year. And in all of Westford Public Schools, it would be about 378,000. It's 29,400 pounds of waste and 490 trees destroyed to do so. If you see the tower that we made, that's 1 month worth of trays. And we had been collecting that for a few months, so we had even more.
Wait, this whole picture? Sorry to interrupt you. Is
That
1
picture.
month?
The tallest one is 1 month.
Oh, okay. The tallest one.
And also, that was not even all grades. At first we started with 8th grade, and then we kind of like went to 6th grade, then 7th grade. And so basically that's not even all grades.
So Stony Brook cafeteria after we implement solutions, even if we the problems are that we use number 5 plastic, which isn't recyclable or sustainable, and it doesn't easily degrade. Another problem is that we have commercially compostable trays that aren't commercially composted, so really they're the same as normal trash. And we also have number 1 plastic, and one of the 2 plastics that are recyclable actually, the 9% of all plastics that are actually recyclable are recycled in Massachusetts.
So let's go over what our other alternatives are for Westford Public Schools cafeterias. Right now we're using an absurd amount of plastic, and we want to reduce that significantly, so we're looking towards cardboard kitchenware with no plastic lining, and we're more looking towards compostable utensils, which are more eco-friendly comparatively to what we're using right now.
So what WPS cafeterias can be. So we want, basically, as we said before, our goal is to make them more sustainable and carbon conscious. So we kind of obviously, as we mentioned before, we figured out that these trays that we're using can be commercially composted, which is different than normal composting. We can't just put it in a normal compost bin and expect it to degrade. But there's something called commercially composting, which they use special techniques to make sure that it turns how it's supposed to be.
I think there's even one based in Groton.
Yeah, there's one based in Groton. So we can still put our normal all the normal stuff that we can compost, and also even more stuff like meat and everything. Before, the problem with meat was that they can't be put into normal composting bins because it'll attract animals, which will obviously you see the problem there. But that's why meat couldn't be. But basically we can really put most of the stuff in commercial composting facilities. And also we want to implement better recycling systems in the Westford Public Schools as well. Right now they're not always the most effective systems, but we're still working towards that. And also trash, we want to basically produce no trash. We want zero carbon footprint, nothing in trash.
Alright, so here are some of our recommendations for what can be implemented in the cafeterias. The first would be replacing trays and plastic with cardboard and compostable kitchenware without plastic linings, because that kind of gets rid of the point of having something be cardboard. If it's plastic, you still can't dispose of it as you would cardboard. You can find cheaper trays than are already the mushroom-ish. It's compostable ones that we have. They can save on solid waste. We can partner with Bootstrap Compost for food disposal and kitchenware that has been dirtied. That can also save on the cost of solid waste. We can set up recycling for beverage plastic and clean cardboard kitchenware, which would be to little to no cost. And then we can set up recycling for flexible plastic wrap and baggies to be delivered to the collection sites.
So basically, in general, while it does seem a bit expensive, basically in the long run we are saving money even with all of these different facilities that we want to implement.
Something else to think about. Students are required to take certain foods, in the cafeterias, students are required to actually take fruits, at least one serving of fruit. But most of the time students just throw these away in the trash, so they get wasted. So the question to consider is, how can we keep these out of the trash and give them to people who actually want to eat them?
Thank you guys for your time tonight. We'll open it up to any questions. that you guys have for us, but we really look forward to working with the Westford Public Schools community to make our schools more environmentally conscious.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll open right up for questions.
Can I just say before we even get into the questions, thank you for an extremely clear and well thought out presentation. I think you nailed it from start to finish. We've gotten a really good idea of where this journey led you and exactly coming up with the recommendations. I can't agree any more with you guys. It's something I've been very conscious about. Policy committee, we voted on a new sustainability green policy last year, and so it's definitely something we're committed to. And the only thing I would say is that, you know, I'm happy to look more at policy, but I would love if, as a committee, we could kind of follow up with this maybe in the spring, as to some of these recommendations, and if we can take a look at seeing what we can implement and make changes across the district, not just in Stony Brook. But well done.
Yeah, Ming Chen.
Yeah, I have actually two questions. One question is like, how much is the food waste? Do you guys like food in the cafeteria?
That's a lot of questions.
As he said, so a lot of the things sometimes we're required to take, but like people are required to take them, but they don't really think about the consequences of like throwing them away. Like they don't really think about how much food, how much waste they're producing. Like people have to start thinking as a whole. Like how much waste are we producing as a school or as a district? Like people are not really thinking about that right now. Right now they're taking an apple because they're required to, but they're not actually eating it. They're throwing it away. So if there's like a better system like that, maybe we can still be health conscious with our students, but like still at the same time be environmentally friendly. I think that would be a better system to implement.
The other question is that, like, have we actually looked into reusable utensils, just like rinse it up and then reuse it? Like for example, the tray instead of like paper or plastic, and I have seen like in China a lot of places they're just using like steel like trays, which like they are like bowl shape and they are wok kind of shape. Like you use it and then you actually put it back and then it's rinsed and then you use it again. Like you use it for 10 years.
This probably reduces all the individual containers you need then too. Right?
Yeah.
The student advisory committee asked about that, like trays that we could get, like the dishwash, and I believe the answer that we got was that the dishwashers themselves are incredibly expensive and very hard to maintain. It's the upkeep of those dishwashers that is the main cost for schools that have those systems, and that's why if we were to look at replacing our trays or doing different trays, we would prefer compostable trays as opposed to reusable trays like that.
Not every school is even, not all of our schools would even be able to support
Also
the
hot
space
water, I think.
Yes.
The
for
hot
that
water, I
as
think,
well
is a
too,
huge
but that's a
cost
good,
as well.
that's a good point.
I was thinking the same thing that you were thinking. But also in terms of, because I went to school a long time ago and we had the plastic trays and people, they did have to be washed. But I also thought about, you know, there's been more of a movement to folks carrying their own things, right? Like carrying your own receptacles and having your own utensils. And so there could be, as a parent whose child had to have her trombone brought to school multiple times, I understand that this could be rife with difficulties, but you know, there is a universe in which you know, kids have their own stuff and bring it home and are responsible for, you know, bringing it back. Just thinking about your multiple pieces, because I think that when this is terrific. Your pictures are compelling. Your text is really good. You answered the question of cost savings, which I teach a class to master students, and sometimes they leave that out. So I think it's really good that you all brought that in. You may have heard, you were here for a few minutes, there is a lot of budget issues on the table this year, and so in order to look at that, you might have to like partner with someone and look at the hard numbers on a tough year like this. If you were in my master's class at BU, that's what I would tell you.
I do know that Sue Thomas, who is actually participating in a different meeting tonight as well too, but I know was able to look at your project already, has been in conversation with some of your teachers. She was already even saying to me that part of that follow-up, even with the cafeteria, to find out, okay, well, what products do exist? What would these costs be? Things like that. I know she's already ready to help with that process as well too, which I think is good.
That's great.
Great job. Thank you for bringing this to us, raising it in the community. Two questions that pop into my mind. One is, our current trays, they are compostable? We're just not.
They're compostable.
They're commercially.
Big, like
Facility.
Big facility.
It needs
Gotcha.
it's
Okay.
a separate,
Okay.
like,
But we're not
artificial.
doing that
So
right
we're-
now.
It's better, but I mean, I remember when we made the switch from styrofoam. You probably remember when you were in probably elementary school. You might have had styrofoam trays. I don't remember that. Like 5-6 years ago, we had styrofoam trays, and we made the switch to these. So yes,
It looks
that's
like
com-
it become furniture.
That's
It could be
compelling.
brought in here.
Yeah,
There are
no,
other
good
things that
point.
could be-
That's compelling visually to see. Just a small sample.
Selection.
Yeah. The other, comment and question is just like there was something, and I guess I know this happens, but you like saying apples being thrown, like whole apples being thrown away is just horrifying to me. Like it just I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight thinking about like all the wasted apples out there as an apple lover. But no, we have to. We can't do that, right? So I'm really glad because that's not something we often talk about. We do talk about the trays, but I thought I've heard WA sometimes has like a table where it's like, take a penny, leave a penny, take an apple, leave an apple. No, okay. I thought I had heard that. I just wonder if that's
Schools have tried things like that, right? Where it's like you don't want this part of your lunch, so you put this here, and someone wants, they wanted the chips or they wanted the apple, and they kind of trade and do. And sometimes something like that can work. I think the challenge is, is somebody watching over it, right? To make sure that that you're not just creating an additional concern for yourself. And the thing that you keep mentioning, which is true, is like in order for the universal lunch program to exist, students have to have certain things. And my question to you was if like that idea of then giving any of that food that's not being used to somebody else, there's also very specific restrictions that don't allow us to do certain things. So I didn't know if you had researched or you might be able to find out like what might we be able to do with that food, because I know that becomes a problem for like just a lot of restaurants too, where they're not allowed to donate extra food for certain health reasons. And so it's kind of like it just becomes this additional problem.
Yeah, I have seen places where it's like the food, like for example, they cater food and then they actually food open, like half of food not eaten, but they have to throw away because like shelters or food pantry wouldn't accept them.
Right.
What makes? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, I feel like the best way to solve the problem is kind of to stop the problem, like right there, kind of prevent that food from being thrown away. And I feel like the best way to do that for students, especially, is awareness. Right now, people are like not thinking. People right now are like, especially my generation, people are thinking very individually. Like, I'm throwing away an apple. But like, when you think about it, like, when people start thinking about like as a whole, like as a school or as a district or as a country, like think about how many apples we're throwing away. I feel like that starts to make an impact on students. And I feel like that's what we have to emphasize on, like a bit of my civics action project here, but like something like education, like in my civics action project was like environmental education. So something like some type of thing like that. That kind of, I feel like that creates an effect on students.
Yeah, who can you give that apple to? You know what I mean? You're not going to eat that apple. What can you do with that apple that's actually productive and could be beneficial to somebody? If the school can't collect 30 apples and then give them to somebody, but you might be able to do it as an individual. That's a good point.
Were there some, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, that jumped out to me too, right? Like the fact that there's so much food being wasted. And I wonder if if you guys do come to a conclusion as to something that could help that outside of education and stuff, I'd be interested in it, certainly if it was from like a policy perspective, right? Like just thinking out loud here, right? I'm not sure what our policies are on children taking food with them outside of the cafeteria, but something like an apple, like if you're not interested in eating it at that point, maybe it's something that you could take with you, and of course, like, there might be reasons why we would be against something like that, but I would be interested in hearing, like from a policy perspective, are there things that we as a district can do to kind of reward people from not having so much waste as you guys have pointed out?
I'm gonna follow up on what you were saying, Sean, because it's one of the things that I was thinking as I was listening to you say, like, that education is super important, and I agree with you. The first step to everything is like informing folks. What I think is one of the barriers to the eco stuff is that we're really comfortable, and we want things to be convenient. So my charge to you is to think about how can you make it just as convenient for someone to do something with this apple as it is for them to throw in the barrel. So if there's going to be a table or something, or this food is going to go somewhere, then someone has to agree to take charge of that, or some group of folks in your organization that cares about these issues, because you have to make it as convenient for the person to take that apple or to put it somewhere as it is for them to just throw it in the barrel. And I would love to, as a person who works in the public interest sector, I would love to say that knowledge and caring and compassion is enough, but you have to also take the next step to make that leap for somebody. So just think about it. This is smart. It's really good.
Just trying to circle back.
I was just going to say this could be a step towards Cameron Senior Center, towards other communities, along with Sue Thomas, and just extrapolating this out across the community. So this is the sort of action and those steps, those civic-minded projects that we talk about that's needed. And as an educator, I thank you for bringing that to the table. So this is important stuff.
I had a question, because you mentioned Bootstrap, and I know there's a new initiative with the town. So it sounds like you're already in connection with Sue Thomas. Have you had any interactions with the Westford Recycling Commission? Because I think they were sort of the lead in setting up the resident option for the Bootstrap compost.
I haven't so last year I was part of this like youth environmental leadership. I forget, it was a long name. I forget what it's called. So yeah, I think I met with the Recycling Commission once. I remember the name Bootstrap was like mentioned somewhere, but I personally don't have like much of a connection, like much of it, like interaction with that.
So maybe after tonight, I can help build that bridge.
Thank you.
There you are. From the Recycling Commission for that bridge.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Great. So we'll help make that connection and see what we can do, because I know they're working with like a discount for households right now. So hopefully we can figure something out.
And in that spirit, like, we want to partner with you, right? Like, we don't want to make it feel like you are now the people who are solving this, because I know that's not why you're here. You're here to say we want to look for other people to make positive change. And while what we do here has limited scope, look to us as partners. If you need to come back, if you need to reach out on who you should be in contact with, please do, because we want to support you in this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Can you just tell us how long has it taken to collect the trays that you have there? Is that from last year? Is that just this year? What's going on with the trays? And I don't know if is Nick able to see the trays for people who are watching?
Yeah, I think this is.
Okay, good.
I don't.
It's not just
we're not sharing
trays. There's lots of dirty trays we can't collect.
Which
And
I'm
that's only a third of
somewhat
what's
grateful.
in my car right now.
Yeah, okay. I am glad that you didn't put the dirty trays in your car.
We don't keep
Okay.
those. It's about 300 a day at Stony Brook alone.
Okay.
Oh. Great. Unfortunately, we do public comment at the beginning of the meeting.
Even on this agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, but we can help connect you for afterwards. Thank you. Any
We're
other?
giving out free trays.
We are free clean trays. Clean-ish trays.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
So much for having us.
Well done.
They say one of them mentioned this was a civics. It felt like it came.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is literally the project that my kids do.
Right.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh. Do you need water?
I have, it's like a 3-week cough that I'm
I like how as soon as they talked about like pollutants in the
The second
air,
they said
smoke,
fire,
like
you
that was
started, the
nice,
second
type-
they, yeah, the
nice.
second they
I
talked
mean-
about fire and smoke, or pollutants, you started coughing.
If I could figure out how to turn it off for 2 meetings.
Is,
There's no
is,
other way to make this a
Sage
presentation.
Acosta next?
Yes.
Is always next.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Ms. Costa.
It's the Adobe.
Is Patty, or is she, okay.
So next up on our agenda is a presentation from Sage Acosta, our Westford Academy's student support leader, on the postgraduate program proposal.
We are bringing it up.
To share it now.
Let's see if this works.
Thank you for coming tonight.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Perfect. Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening to talk about our postgraduate program. So I just wanted to start with giving a little bit of background on me before, having come to Westford Public Schools. So last year was my first year in WPS, and prior to that, for 17 years, I was at a private special education school for students ages 3 through 22. I was 14 years as a classroom teacher, and then my last 3 years there, I was an administrator. And my last years teaching there, I helped to pilot an 18 to 22 postgrad program. They don't really call it a postgrad program there because it's just built into the overall curriculum, but it was identified as just an area that we really needed to think about our students and how we're preparing them for that post-transition piece. So last year, after joining WPS, I was taking a look at a lot of our sub-separate programs and just to learn about them and kind of see, where do we need to go with some of these programs. And the one that really stuck out for me was our postgrad program. And part of that is, when you think of the town of Westford, we're really, we're a fortunate community where we have so many just local businesses, there's a lot of community involvement. And when we think about, a postgrad program and just what it could be, there's so many potentials, particularly in this town. Currently, our program is kind of combined with another program at the high school. So it's following the same bell schedule. There's really not as much separation as one might hope between being a high school student and then being in this postgrad program. So, So, when I was looking at this, these were all of the things that I was taking into account. And just thinking about if we were to have a more robust 18 to 22 postgrad program, what would that look like? So kind of through the years I was looking at this program, I came up with some of these ideas and then helped to kind of put together a program proposal. So this program, it would really follow more of an integrated therapy model. So the program itself would have built-in supports with speech and language pathology along with occupational therapy. And then we would talk about students' individuals' needs beyond that. So physical therapy, or if there's need to have the support of a behaviorist, or even assistive technology, or even particularly like the nursing medical component. And so kind of together, everything would build this program. So you would have, functional academics that also would integrate things that were taught by a speech language pathologist or an occupational therapist. There would be specific language, communication skills that are needed. And when we're thinking of kind of that 18 to 22, it's really that preparation for adult life, right? So the state really identifies students after 22 as really into adulthood. That's when services shift. And so what are the speech skills or communication skills that are needed? Having an interview, how do you talk to a colleague? How do you talk to a supervisor? How do you talk to a customer? If you're going to college, how do you
relay what it is that you need to, whether it's disability services or your professor or a peer mentor. So there's all these different levels of communication beyond just the articulation components. You know, and then combined in this would be also some vocational skill development and also health and wellness, you know, talking about not just physically moving for individuals, but also how do you maintain a healthy balanced diet? How do you, you know, learning more about nutrition? You know, going into adulthood, what are things that needs to be taught and learned also? And then there's also a component of daily living skills that can be integrated into this. So, you know, they're all kind of working together. They build off of one another. There's kind of your applied academics where, again, the focus is really, you know, could be around consumer economics. So how do you manage a budget? If you're getting paid, what are the components of a paycheck? What are taxes? How do you plan for all of these things? Insurance. There's, you know, I touched upon the communication pieces, and then there's daily living skills. How do you make a bed? How do you fold laundry? How do you do laundry? You know, when you look at a washing machine, there's 18 different cycles. How do you know which one you're supposed to do? And that goes back to the academics, reading tags, reading labels, reading instructions. Occupational therapy folds right into a lot of those skills. You know, if for students who, you know, physically might need some support, how are they going to fold clothes? How are they going to possibly put clothes on a hanger and hang it up on a wardrobe? And then the other component would be a vocational aspect. So it's really teaching and training, but it's based on every student's individual needs. You know, that's kind of the beauty of an 18 to 22 program, is that it's really focused on their post-secondary goals. What do they want to do? What could they do? And just keeping those doors open and providing as much equitable options as possible, right? So when thinking about kind of what this might look like, some ideas to kind of think about is you know, really keeping it in a separate location from the high school. And there's a number of reasons for this, right? There's kind of your easier level of thoughts, right? It can't follow the Bell schedule. It can't, you know, be on that same high school schedule. It's a very separate program, right? But there's also then the emotional piece of it. You know, the students would go through graduation. They're going to graduate from Westford Academy. But then if they return to Westford Academy, how does that make sense for our learners, right, and our individuals? It also allows a greater possibility of opening up to reaching out to the community, working with other schools in the district as well. So there's kind of multiple reasons behind that rationale of where it could be behind a, you know, in a separate location. You know, and then looking at curriculum that really focuses on those self-determination skills, you know, autonomy, advocacy. Those are all really important aspects that all of us always need as we move into adulthood. And then, you know, another layer to this could be starting to develop job sites and looking in the community. You know, can we, you know, again, we have a lot of resources in this town. It's, you know, building those connections, and we can use them as, you know, here's, you know, in this field, whether it's, you know, in an environmental field or a science field, education, business, it's you know, we have all these available in our town, and helping to foster those skills, and it could potentially, if appropriate, lead to employment opportunities, you know, and what better way to have our students be able to do that in their home community, you know, where they're comfortable, where they, you know, potentially could be continuing to live. So another part is obviously the staffing, right? What would this take? And, you know, based on a number of 8 students, right? If there are a total of 8 that we're looking at or less, you would be looking at 1 lead special education teacher, you know, and ideally this teacher has either the transition endorsement by the state, or they have enough knowledge and experience with that post-22 transition process, which is a complicated, you know, very lengthy, ever-changing process. It's connecting with adult agencies, it's the IEP, it's using, you know, ideally this would be using person-centered planning to help develop those IEPs and have those meetings. So you would have that teacher, and then there would be 2 job or transition coaches, and the purpose, the intent would be is that they'd be working with our students, whether it's on daily living skills or the vocational skills or even academics, but they also have the knowledge and expertise to get training on collecting data on how do you teach these skills, how do you start removing the supports from the adult and increasing their independence. What does that look like? Often there's more of a term that's interdependence, not necessarily independence, right? And then of course there's the included supports, which would be able to be embedded with what's currently in the district. So really when we're talking about staffing, it's really those 3 positions. And then the last part would be, some administrative support on this. So, if this is something that we feel would be, advantageous for us as a community and as a district, it's taking the remainder of this year and really building this program. It's creating the spaces, it's looking at the staffing, it's starting to work at, just the fine details of this program, thinking about some of the sources of funding and where that's coming from. And then beyond that, it's, what I guess kind of typical administrators would be doing, right? You're overseeing, you're providing support and guidance, educator evaluations, for the staff, and then again, building those community, network and pieces, and then continuing to look at the model, right? There's many phases to this that can continue to progress, and making sure that it's not just standing still, but continuing to move forward with the times. So when looking at kind of curriculum, what I wanted to provide is just kind of a sample schedule. It's a very broad schedule. Again, these would all be very individualized schedules, and this is just one example of really a number of them. Hopefully it works. There we go. It should come up. No problem.
Hang on. Practice.
Another tab or something.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question
Yeah.
while I do that? So when you say collect data, you mean collecting data on individual students?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify, because I think that could, I'm a data nerd, that could be very broad, but
Absolutely.
Could you, while we're also doing that,
Yes.
would you mind just talking a little bit more about that transition endorsement?
Yes.
Right? And
Yep.
like, what does that really mean? I mean, you
Yep.
talked about it, but like, it's coming from DESE, it's coming from.
Yes. Yeah, so in order to obtain a transition endorsement, it's a series of classes that you would have to take. And it's just really teaching a little bit more about kind of that transition process to the post-22. So it's learning about the different adult funding agencies, it's learning about the different supports, how do you go through that process? When, as a district, is that, 688 referrals submitted to the state, and who do you submit it to? Connecting with different agencies and helping to then identify potential options of what post-22 is going to look like for each individual. And it varies, right? Some individuals might go to a day-based program, some might go to a community-based program, some might go to more of a residential program or a cost, a shared living collaborative even. So it's learning all of those, and how do you navigate that? It's then also finances, it's guardianship, all of the big components that we start thinking about. And it's big. It's a big area, and it changes a lot. It's not static. So, folks who have that endorsement have taken specific classes and then are kind of a little bit more well versed in that. But also the experience is just as important as just having that endorsement. So. Perfect. So here's again just a sample schedule, and there can be flexibility. This would be based on, a 5-day program where, it's all these, it's looking at transitions, but also looking at what are the classes, right? And I want to put that in quotes, because the classes are going to be different. It allows for small group. It allows for, again, going out into the community. So this one is a sample where students aren't going out to job sites currently. It's more, program-based types of vocational opportunities. once a week there would be kind of an community inclusion opportunity where, you know, the class might go to, you know, a grocery store, and either they're shopping for a list or sticking to a budget, and they have to identify what items can they purchase within that budget or not purchase, or finding an employee. How do you know if somebody works in the store versus just another regular day shopper? And then how do you approach them and ask them questions? If you can't reach an item or find an item, what do you do? And that's just at the grocery store. You can do the same at any other store. It's even recreational opportunities, you know, going on a trail walk, or, you know, looking at maps and navigations, planning out trips. So those really build in and foster a lot of those applied skills that we use every day, but not, you know, necessarily have that explicitly taught. And one of the classes that would be built in is a pre-ETS class, so that's pre-employment transition skills. And it's something that we at WA started towards the end of last year, and we found a new partner with Best Buddies, and so it's a free service to schools. Best Buddies has their own funding, whether it's through MRC, one of the state agencies, or they have their own insurance company that will back this. But they have a whole curriculum that works on, you know, those self-determination skills, but also a lot of the pre-employment skills. So creating a resume, interviewing for jobs, all of those components, and that's kind of pre-built. So that's an opportunity where Best Buddies would come. They have their own transition coaches that teach the curriculum, and then the job of the job coaches or the teacher would be, you know, using those materials and helping to implement that across the board. But it's a wonderful program. It's been going extremely well so far at WA, and it's been a nice opportunity. So that would be something that would also continue with this post-grad program. So. And then the other, you know, kind of curriculum, it's pretty in-depth, but just to kind of give an idea of what are the different skill areas that, and Ms. Garcia, this kind of goes back a little bit to your question about some of that data collection, right? And what does that look like, and what does that mean? And it's thinking about those skill sets that's going to continue to advance any individual. And so this is just one example of, you know, the different categories that could be done. So there's, you know, a community practicum. So during that community inclusion experience that, you know, would be provided, what do the skills look like at different levels? And then when you increase kind of the opportunity, right, there's a job shadowing opportunity, or potential internship or specific job training, and then there's even a college component that can be incorporated into this. And so it's just kind of thinking of those skills and how is that measurable? How is that, you know, what does that look like for that individual, and what's the end goal, right? So this all connects to IEP, post-secondary development, and then just overall skills. So just a sample bit on additional curriculum focuses. So I guess kind of the big question is why, right? Why this post-grad program? What's the bigger idea here? And, you know, again, it's the way that it's an approach to help prepare our students for life, for adult life in particular. And what is nice is, you know, the state mandated, you know, kind of academics are completed, they've graduated high school, and so now here's this opportunity to really focus on both vocational, daily, and the applied academic skills, right? So you can get all three of those, and it's really taking why have we been in school for these 12 years and learning all of these things, and how does this apply in kind of the life afterwards. So it's all just kind of this whole big meaning of why we're in school, and then where is it applied. It's building and establishing our relationship in the community, bringing community awareness to all of our learners and all of our students, who is, you know, we support everybody in here. And again, it's providing these opportunities, and in particular, some opportunities of how they're going to remain in this community and what contributions do they have as community members. It helps to foster independence, and it's, you know, really, again, that promotion of autonomy and self-determination skills.
Sejal?
Yes.
While we're right here, can
Yep.
you also just remind anybody who might be listening, I know everybody
Yes.
here on the committee
Yep.
is aware of this, but if anybody's listening to this presentation right now, they might not understand the legality.
Well, that was my
supporting
question. Thank
students
you.
to age 22. Can you talk about that
So,
just for a minute?
Can I
Absolutely.
can I follow up with this? Because one of the things you said was that the students have already graduated from high school, and our legality extends to the students who have not graduated high school.
We've not accepted a diploma.
Have not accepted a diploma. So if appropriate, students who receive special education services can be eligible for services up through age 22. If students do earn a diploma, so they've met graduation, high school and state requirements, they would receive a diploma. However, once a student or an individual receives and accepts that diploma, in their high school ends. And so at that point, then they would be considered into adult and they move on to that secondary piece. Students have, and individuals have the option to not accept the diploma at that time and can wait until any time between that 18 to 22 age range. It doesn't mean you have to stay in until you're 22, but it's anywhere within that range. And part of this is, I think the state's effort in recognizing that it's really challenging to try and meet all of our students' needs within that K through 12 range, right? And how do you balance the demands on the academics along with the vocational and functional life skills? And so, so students can be, and this is where, DESE's language is a little bit loose because they want to build some flexibility so that it's really based on what is appropriate for that individual and for that student.
And typically, those are the students who we know will be accessing adult services
Correct.
come 22 years old.
Exactly.
But those services do not kick in until 22, therefore you have the 18 to 22 gap in which we are still deemed responsible.
Correct.
Similar to students on the other end, where we're responsible for students that are 3 years old until 5 years old before they come into kindergarten.
Exactly.
Just so I can have this straight in my head.
Yes.
We obviously owe a legal obligation if a student is identified and is on an IEP plan. We have a legal obligation to perform that IEP plan. So long as the student who has potentially met all of the high school graduation requirements does not accept that diploma, we are still obligated to fulfill those IEP
It's not.
requirements.
It's not exact. It's not like
Is
you're
that
being
right?
served with a subpoena. It's
It-
like
it would have
it's
to,
just. It's just
it would have to be a team decision.
Exactly.
For the student's readiness to enter the adult world.
Right, that they
That's-
have
And that
it.
is different for every student. Yeah.
it's that
Yes.
they haven't met the requirements for graduation, and so you either your special education entitlement either ends at high school graduation, or it can extend to 22, but it cannot extend beyond 22.
And I knew that everything you're saying is fantastic so far, but I knew that there's a complexity
Yes.
to this
Right.
that not everybody would necessarily
So
appreciate.
and so that was actually my question. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, what's the size of this cohort? And some students.
She's going to talk
Okay, great. So then I just stop talking.
Perfect time.
No, not a problem. Great. So currently, and numbers change a little bit, but for graduating this year, the students who so far have been identified that would, really have the necessity for some type of a postgraduate program, right now the number is at 8.
For this year or total?
For this year.
Okay. So total
there
how
are,
many?
Well, so currently there are also students who are out of district placed. So I believe the last time that I looked at those numbers, I think we're looking at just day placements. I think there's another 6 students who would be continuing in a postgraduate program, but as an out-of-district
I think we
placement.
should stop calling it postgraduate, but.
Which is true. No,
Which
but that's
is
an
true.
excellent point.
Yes.
That's a conversation that we have because
Yes.
it's not postgraduate. But one of the things that they had talked about was about the social emotional well-being and support for the students who might be walking with their class or have gone through 4 years at the academy with their class, and to not then acknowledge it as a different program. And it's still currently what we do have does exist at the academy. They wanted to signify that there is something different here. Semantically, technically, you are absolutely right.
Legally is all
Legally,
that-
right.
that's all I care about.
Legally, it is not. Yeah.
Yes.
Because when you originally started talking about it as a postgraduate program, I actually was thinking about it as separate from the IEP process. So
Gotcha.
I was thinking that this was something that we were looking to take on outside of the
Gotcha.
IEP process. And so that's only because I'm approaching this as an attorney and I was thinking about our budget stuff that we have going on. So that's why my question comes to, like, what size is this cohort? How many kids are out of district? How many kids are in district? Like, what is this a cost savings to bring this in-house?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so the minimal numbers that we would be looking at is 8 who will be, completing their 12th grade year at Westford Academy this year. And then we have 5 or 6 that are currently out of district that would continue in an 18 to 22 program, in theory, out of district. And then every year, the numbers will build, right? So the 8 who are exiting 12th grade year this year, would have 4 years, and then it's just going to continue to build on that number every single year. So when thinking about kind of those financial considerations, right, really it's looking at, the positions that we had already kind of talked about, and really that administrative support, it's not its own position, right? This is something that can be added to an existing position. So that 3.4 FTE is really for that lead special ed teacher plus the 2 transition coaches, and then that 0.4 is added to somebody's, to an existing role. And then the other, financial considerations would need to just be around the materials, right, between the curriculum and supplies. So when looking at kind of the, the numbers, and again, taking that cohort of 8, right, if the startup cost would be less than or equal to year 1 cost for out-of-district placements. Year 2 and beyond, it would be less than any of those out-of-district placements. So, is it a cost-saving, component for us as a district? Yes.
It's a long-term strategy.
So,
Yes.
so, so currently, all of the kids, they are going out of district today. Is that right?
Can you repeat
The
that?
majority of them are going out of district today is what Min
We're
Chen is
paying.
saying.
We're paying.
Our 18 to 22
Yes.
cohort
Yeah.
is largely out of
Yes.
district.
Yes.
And then you say that by establishing this program, we're going to keep them in-house.
Yes.
Right.
So on one limit, you have all your students out of district. On the other limit, you have all your 18 to 22 kids in district within this hypothetical program, and then we're somewhere in the middle,
Somewhere in the
building
middle.
that capacity.
Because it
Correct.
still might not be the right placement
For
for
everybody.
all of
Correct.
those students.
And
but-
those
But we
decisions,
would
right.
be able, there are students who right now are currently in another placement where this is the program that they're participating in. And if we had that program established here, we would not necessarily, they could actually be experiencing that, to your point earlier on, here in the community of Westford, rather than needing to go to a different community where they might be creating relationships with a business, but then not really be able to participate in that business when they're 22.
Yeah.
So the expectation is like, for example, this year we identify 8. Without this program, all of the 8 will go out of district.
Right.
We do have we do have a
Right.
program. It isn't as robust as this, and so I don't know if it would be completely. But I think are we supporting one student right now?
We have 1 student right now.
So what you're coming to the table with is a ground floor step to begin the building of a more robust in-district program.
Correct.
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I also believe that we would have the option of also, if we had space available, that other students from other surrounding districts could also potentially access this program, which could be revenue generating as well.
True. Yep.
So it doesn't necessarily just have to serve.
Again, it speaks,
our-
that speaks to how far does one have to travel in order to access a program like this? And you're right, many of our surrounding communities might prefer to have their students come to Westford.
I had just a quick question. Can you ballpark what an out-of-district placement for this cohort it costs? I understand that's, I know that's dicey, but.
Yeah.
Well, it could range
I was like,
anywhere from.
I think Bill could answer that
I can
question.
give you a number right now.
Our member collaborative is
depends.
38,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can go all the way up to $500,000, depending on the complex
Yeah.
needs.
I would-
Clearly, that $500,000 is something that we would not be.
I was like,
Yeah.
we can't do that.
No.
With,
Exactly. I'm not
with,
doing that.
with a member district student out of district tuition plus transportation, I would say average $120,000 to $140,000.
Okay, thank you.
That we see prep, wearing my convenient timing.
I know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please continue.
That's
If there's one. Oh.
that's it.
Might have
Questions?
interrupted
That's just
enough to kind of
questions.
throw
That's
it.
it.
Because I will say that the numbers that we'll talk about exist in my budget presentation.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so I just want to make sure too that we have sort of weaved that line of having a non-budget consideration of programmatic changes. Obviously, it's right up against our budget and it has implications in our budget, and obviously in these scenarios, we do appreciate things that have that, long-term strategy of cost efficiencies, but these are also individuals, and I want to be sensitive to that too. It's not just.
Excellent point. Thank you. Yeah.
Did I miss it? Did we talk about location? Are we thinking here?
So that was one thought that I had was here. Ideally, in like a picturesque world, there would be two different spaces, right? So there would be one that would be kind of developed like a mock apartment. So there would be a functioning kitchen with a washer and dryer. There would be a dining / living / office space, but then also a separate bedroom. And so, in that bedroom, there would be the bed, a dresser, a wardrobe, so students can work on those skills of just making a bed, putting away the clothing, folding laundry. You have the laundry there, so you can actually practice doing laundry. How do you, something as small as how do you look at the detergent cup and how much detergent do you need to put? What type of detergent should you get? Dryer settings, washer settings, and then also there's the kitchen itself, right? And by having it also a functioning kitchen, part of this proposal is around lunch. Individuals can make their lunches, have access to the kitchen, so they're buying the supplies, they're planning, they're making it, and then they're eating it. So it's this full incorporation, and again that integrated model idea of all of these things are just getting applied. So one space would kind of be this mock apartment idea, excuse me, and then you would have more of like a traditional classroom space that would also have vocational spaces in there. So an area set up like an office where there's a phone, there's filing cabinets, and so there could be a label maker, and some of these program-based types of jobs could be coming out of these vocational spaces. There could be a cafe area set up in this where, and part of the advantage of being set up at a place like Central, office is you're not competing with the food business in schools, right? So you have adults, you have other individuals coming into this building. Hey, they can get a coffee, or this program could make some breakfast items or lunch items and sell those. And then there's teaching the academics, of course, and also having that conference room space for the IEP meetings or any other meetings that need to take place with programs or with adult agencies. So
our available space currently, we felt like somewhere in this building would make the most sense. The first thing was, and Sejal advocated for this very well, is it really, as great as it's been that we've been trying to establish a program, it needs to not be at Westford Academy, because they need to be moving someplace else. And the ability to, here we had talked about, okay, well maybe a space in another school, but the reality is that we think it would be best for them to be primarily interacting with the adults that are working here at central office too as well. So that's the initial thought process.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Appreciate
Great,
it.
thank you.
Well, we are at our budget
Okay.
agenda item.
All right, well, thank you. So if,
Yeah, give me
will you, yeah, you'll be able to
one
pull that up. So we had a wonderful student presentation, start the evening. We've had a very thoughtful and I think, well-developed presentation about a program by Sajal, and now we need to talk about some more heavy possible subjects with our budget. I sent a message to all of our families on December 1st, letting them know that this was going to be a different process this year, that based on the work that we've done with the Budget Task Force, that I'm going to be presenting two different budgets, as will the town manager next week when she does her budget presentation as well too. And so the beginning of this presentation will be very similar to what I've done for the past couple of years, talking about the timeline, talking about the development, the overview that we got there. We will be looking at our enrollment numbers, and we'll be talking about the adjustments that we anticipate making due to our enrollment numbers and potentially any other efficiencies that we're looking at. We will break it down with the main revenue and expenses, and then the last part of the presentation is going to be discussing what additional adjustments would need to be made if we were to remain within the Proposition 2.5 constraints. Because as we look through the budget, we will see, and based on the conversations that we've already been having, we know that our needs that we're seeing outpace what our town's budget is able to support. So we need additional funds there. So with the timeline, this is again the breakdown. Tonight we're talking about the budget presentation. We'll be talking about it for a couple of meetings, as is our typical process. The town manager will present her recommendation and budget to the select board on December 12th, which is a Tuesday night. And we are anticipating that the school committee would vote on this, on the school budget on the 16th. January 18th is our first meeting with the FinCom and school committee, where we have the budget hearings. Always the budget is finally determined at town meeting, and this year town meeting is March 23rd. If we indeed are looking at the need for an override, that requires 2 votes. That would require a vote on March 23rd and also an additional vote at the ballot box on Election Day on May 7th. So many of the things that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of meetings, we won't really have complete answers as to the resolution for a long time. So I am encouraging people to stay involved, ask questions, pay close attention to different meetings. Things might change as conversations are continuing to take place. So I encourage that.
And we could probably circle back to this slide.
We can.
At the end.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the budget development. So as I was saying, I actually shared 2 messages. I shared a message with all of our families talking about these 2 budgets. And I also did send a separate message to all of our staff because all of the scenarios that we're talking about include reductions. The first scenario is the typical reductions that we've talked about for the last couple of years, which sometimes are section changes and it's based on enrollment, and it's been a more typical conversation than we've been having. But additional rounds of reductions are going to require a much longer process of a reduction in force, and I wanted to make sure that all of our staff were able to hear about any potential reductions before hearing about it, and if it impacts them directly, before hearing about it in this public meeting right now. So I did share that, and I know the principals have been able to have building-based meetings as well too, and so there's been a lot of conversations that have been going on. But for everybody to remember, we started this, well, the town established the budget task force in the spring of 2023 based on different budget challenges that the schools and the town were identifying. They met all summer long. Valerie's on the committee. I was on the committee. Jenny Lynn, our director of finance, was on that committee as well with town partners and other members of the community. Met all summer long. Those are all recorded, and people can watch those meetings on the website. There was a final report. It's 100 pages long. I actually think it's I say a quick 100-page read because there's a lot of charts, but some of the charts have really, really small text, so that might be difficult. But I really would encourage people to read this report, because it not only does it talk about the current state that we're looking at, but it is comparing Westford in many ways to so many different communities. And those are questions that people have had for a long time about how do we compare? Are we budgeting things the way other people are budgeting things? And a lot of those questions get answered in this report. Additionally, there's a real specific breakdown as to what municipal budgeting is and how it has to work, which I think is really important for people to understand. So I would encourage folks to review that. We did look at our enrollment numbers. We talked about the budget needs in a couple of different meetings with leadership teams, small groups and large groups together. And then finally here, which we had talked about earlier, you were all aware that I was going to do this because you asked me to do this, but I'm sharing with you two different scenarios. The first scenario is for us to maintain our level services, although those services look slightly different. But in order for us to maintain the level quality work that we're doing in Westford Public Schools, what would that needs request be for FY25? And that's my recommendation to you tonight. The second scenario is reflecting the necessary reductions in order for us to have a balanced budget that lives within the Proposition 2.5 constraints. Okay. And then I've had, Jenny Lynn and I have had multiple meetings with our town partners, with our town manager and director of finance. Usually we might have just like one or two meetings with them, but we've actually been talking with them quite a bit throughout the whole task force process, throughout this process, meeting quite regularly. And actually one of the things I didn't include here is just the number of, we've had more joint chair meetings, I think,
Yep.
this year too, which I think has been helpful for people to, even just to understand, okay, what exactly are we talking about? We can go to the next slide. Thank you, Kevin. So the budget challenges, these were identified in the task force, so it might be familiar to folks. But I just wanted to lay these out again to say that as we were coming into FY25, the reason why we were looking at this and we got involved with the budget task force were because these were the school needs that we identified specifically. Last year, OSD, which is the Operational Service Divisions, they had approved a special education increase for private special education tuitions that it could go up to 14%. Well, everybody did take that availability and they went to the 14%. Historically, we would budget for it to be a 3.3% increase in those different rates. Now, what we didn't know last year when we were building the FY24 budget was how was the state going to respond to this, because this is across the entire state. It's not just a Westford thing. This impacts every single school district in the state of Massachusetts. And so what we knew was that we would be able to absorb the 14% increase this year for FY24 with our Special Education Stabilization Fund and using school choice funds as a one-time fund. But we knew that that's not sustainable for the long run. So we knew going into the development of FY25 that we were going to have to figure out how we could build into our budget this increase for special education costs. So, and what we had projected that to be is the $1.2 million that you'll see there on the screen. The other major budget challenge was that when we were in negotiations and looking at our various contracts and looking at how the data that showed how our employees compared to our market basket and to the comparable districts, we learned that we were not keeping pace with the competitive pay. And so we identified what that target would be in order for our contracts and our employees to remain competitive. And when we say remain competitive, we don't mean to outpay everybody in those comp districts. What we look at is we look at all of the data from the comparable districts, and this is explained more in the report for people. And then we look at the middle of that target and figure out we don't want people to be at a disadvantage coming to work for Westford, right? And so that's how we identify what that target is we look at that full range and then we try to narrow in on what the middle of that would be so that we know that we're not at the high end, but we're also not at the bottom of it as well too. And that projected cost is the $3.3 million that you'll see on that in that bullet point there, in order to get us where we would need to be across employee groups. And then the last big piece was our bus contract. So we are in our 5th year of our bus contract, which is all you're allowed to do. You're only allowed to have contracts for that amount of time. So this year we had to go out to bid anyway, and so we're in the process of figuring out what our next transportation contract is going to be. And the research that we did saw that our surrounding towns, they were looking at least an 11% increase in their new bus contracts. So we factored that into the equation, and we came up with the $444,000. So when we added all these things together, that's how we were figuring out that, plus utility costs and a couple of other pieces to figure out what is our FY25 scenario looking like? What is our projected FY25 budget? And that's what we looked at with the budget task force. So now our overview is here. So our current budget for FY24 is $65,889,564. That is a 2.89% increase from FY23. Now in the middle here, the projection that we identified that we used for the budget task force, when we looked at all those things that I was just talking about, it ended up being an 8.18% increase, or $5.3 million. When we started crafting and looking at what our needs were going to be with FY25, when we started looking at the enrollment adjustments that we would make, when we started looking at the potential efficiencies that were coming out of the budget task force, we had worked with our town partners again and identified a target of 7%. We wanted to reduce that initial projection by 1.18% to get us to a 7% increase, to see if we can meet our needs within that target. And so that 7% increase is $4.6 million. And that's what I'm going to talk about over the next few slides, which is my recommendation for the FY25 needs request. Go ahead, Kevin. Thank you. So the first thing we looked at was our projected enrollment. This is the same scenario that we've done for a long time, similar way we've shown it to the committee for the last couple of years. What we did this year is we actually included our as of enrollment. So the green slide here is the actual as of enrollment as of November 20th, because there have been some changes from the rollover in 23-24 to what we actually are seeing November 20th. And then we looked at the November 20th data, and then we rolled them up to the next grade. We didn't add numbers to them. We just took that number of class. We've actually found that that's a little bit more historically accurate for our planning purposes than trying to add an increase or whatever, and then just look and see what actually happened. And then we looked at the middle section here. We'll talk about the actual sections, or the sections that we had planned for, and then most of those are the exact same. We did just add the one section in first grade.
Can you just explain?
Sorry, yep, go back.
Can you just explain the white, this column?
Yes,
And this
that's
column
the
one more time?
sections that we had talked about last year.
So the white and the yellow go together?
Yes.
The green and the green, okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
And then there was, and so I'll highlight here. This is the one change, and I didn't mark it red because the only things that are red are what we're talking about changing for the future. But if you'll notice here, this is really the only difference.
Right,
is that, and we
Robinson.
talked with you about that. That we,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I pointed the wrong one. That grade 1, we ended up adding a section in grade 1 at Robinson. So that's the only difference between the green sections and the white sections.
Okay. Thank you.
There. And so then that would actually, so if we can just go back there, I'll explain it. And then, so if you'll see in the far column again, we look at the reductions as to where we are suggesting we might be able to reduce sections, and still the projected average class size, now that final blue column over there, is working. That's all the projections, so that's what we're anticipating for next year. And you'll see that those all still fall close to or below the school committee guidelines for class sizes for this grade level. You will see a couple of 22.4s, which means that some of those rooms are at 23, right? So that is putting us right there where with that guideline. Sorry, now Catherine.
Yeah.
You can- We've been talking about the middle school reduction for the last couple of years. That grade is now in 8th grade, so we're anticipating that we would be able to reduce the sections of 10 at Stony Brook down to 8 and end up with, that would be the reduction, and then end up with those class sizes there. I'll remind people that the reductions at the middle school can become quite complicated because of the model, the team model, that if you operate outside of an even number, the impact I can't think of the right word, but it breaks apart that ability to have the team with.
It unravels.
Thank you. Unravels the ability to do that. One of the things that we're looking at this year, if you'll see in the far column, where you don't identify with a specific grade, but based on the numbers at WA and based on the different sections in a variety of classes, that you'll see in this presentation that we're recommending a reduction of 2.2 FTEs at WA, which is made up of multiple sections.
Can I ask, Chris, just on that, in the Stony Brook, it says puts 3 current 5th graders, is that original kids from day at Stony Brook? Or am I, you see just there in that in the school
What does
column.
the OR mean? Is she?
Yeah, puts 3 current grade OR kids from day at Stony Brook.
I think it's going to be referring to a program that exists that's moving. No, OR.
Can you expand that column a little bit? Is it cut off something?
No, it's not.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Okay.
And we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
have to think about that for a second. Because we do have programs where the students don't stay with
Yeah.
their sister schools.
Yeah.
And typically one of the changes that takes place a day every year is based on the percentage of where students are going.
Yeah.
So if it didn't say day school, then I would have said that it meant, because we will sometimes have students from Crisafulli go to Stony Brook who wouldn't normally have necessarily gone in that trajectory unless they were working in a specific program. So I'll figure that out.
Okay.
Adjustments. So this first screen is what you've already seen, right? So it shows the 2 FTEs at the middle school level, 2.2 FTEs at Westford Academy, and then 4 is what the final number was at the elementary schools. I didn't actually talk about that on that screen, but you could see that it's reducing a section here. Sometimes it's moving a section, so that in some schools it's a 0, change. And then here is just an example of where those positions that we're looking at Westford Academy. Within the world languages, not knowing specifically which one as of yet, we could look at 0.8 sections in world languages, 0.2 HSS is social studies, 0.6 VPA is visual performing arts, and 0.6 ELA is English language arts. And so those, based on the enrollments and the numbers, we know that could exist from potentially combining some levels of classes, combining, it might impact certain electives, but the idea being is that it's bringing, it's more of a combining of smaller groups together than removal of programs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. One thing for you to all be aware of, and if people who are looking at the math, when we are talking about a teacher FTE, we use Master Step 4 in our salary scale as our target number because it could be such a wide range of people. And that number is $66,897. So those numbers you'll see there are 66,897. I know I said it correctly a second ago. Multiplied by the FTEs for this category. That's not the same when we're talking about different groups because the number wouldn't equate. If we're talking about administrators, we would use a different number. If we're talking about ESPs, we'd use a different number, things like that. But we do have a specific process in doing that so that we can identify what the projection is. Okay, so this is different information. So we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to the transportation slide. But one of the things that we had looked at, our special education van fleet that we have in-house was established a long time ago as a cost savings measure for this district. And as we were continuing to dive into the budget and look at what the potential costs were that we were seeing, we actually discovered that it was no longer cost savings for us. And that if we were to remove our van fleet and outsource the special education, out of district, and even in district transportation, specialized transportation that we need, it would be a savings of $227,170 for us. That includes the addition for those leases that we've been talking to you about, because we would no longer be leasing vehicles and we wouldn't be absorbing you had those conversations earlier, right, about how high that cost was.
Yeah, I remember last spring we talked about like leasing some electrical vans, so that's not going to happen.
So that's a different, so hold that thought. So yeah, we're not talking about leasing. Everything we've talked about, the fleet, is a very different thing. Right now, I will just say we do have a capital request to purchase one EV van for special education. And we want to keep that request because that would actually support the program that Sajal just described to us. Because without having our own van, we wouldn't be able to transport students to the different work sites and things like that. So that's actually a request we want to keep on the table with capital. So I just didn't, that can confuse the issue a little bit, but I'll come back to that. But so that's a major change for us. Our special education van drivers are incredible, and they have incredible relationships with our students that we value tremendously. The costs for the infrastructure got to the point where this was something that we just couldn't we couldn't not consider. And my hope and goal would be that whoever we end up contracting with for that, providing that support, would hire our drivers so they would still be driving our students just as an employee of a different person. And that is very possible. So that's something that because it's a very difficult reduction in itself. And then the last reduction that we looked at was that we have a data specialist. We have one data specialist in the district, and we believe that that those responsibilities can actually be absorbed in central office through different means. So that total reductions right there is $838,725. That's the initial reductions that we're looking at, which is taking us down from that 8.18% increase. So now if you go to the next slide, we do have additions. We'll forgive the term post-grad for this moment in time because we had already, but for the transition, the 18, the 18 to 22-year-old program that Sajal was talking about. And if you're watching right now and you didn't see this earlier, I would encourage you to watch the earlier part of this meeting because Sajal Costa does an excellent job explaining the needs and the breakdown of this 18 to 22-year-old program at Westford Academy. That cost we are projecting would be $227,449 for us to get that up and running, the cost of the 3.4 FTEs. And then additionally, we actually had to hire somebody already based on our rising ELL students and the increasing caseloads in the district. And we actually already hired somebody. That person did start December 1st. So we have to absorb that in the FY25 budget. So that's something that we needed to include. So those total additions come to $294,346.
But can I clarify then, based on Sajal's presentation earlier, even though that 227 is an addition, in general, because it's a new program, we would hope to see that reflected as a deduction in our out of district tuition.
Yes. definitely in the long term it will be, and we think in the short term it will be. It's very difficult because that's one of those situations where we do have, and it's something that she had mentioned earlier, we do have 8 students who are, who will be going to an 18 to 22-year program. And Bill had even mentioned the potential costs of that per student. But the other piece, and this is one of the reasons why we think it's really important for this to be on our radar, if we are waiting until March 23rd and then May 7th to even understand what our budget is, those decisions for individual students based on their team meetings would have already been made. Right. So that's it's you're waiting too long. So there you have to have a certain amount of forethought. And I will say, the majority of the students have already been thinking, and their families have already been thinking about that. So I think we have students and families who are excited and very optimistic about us establishing an 18 to 20-year program. But they've also needed to be thinking about, okay, if that doesn't happen, what are we going to do? Right.
So we think there is a savings. It's just we don't know the numbers yet.
Right. Exactly. Right. So we can go to the next slide. So in addition to that, these are other considerations that we've looked at because we did identify that 7% target, and so we wanted to see, okay, what else can we do in order to reduce to get to where we are? So we are. This includes increasing we've been typically, in FY24 we used $440,000 for school choice offsets. We're going to increase that to $460,000. I'll talk about school choice a little bit later. An additional $4,000 offset from food services to support the business office salary, and there's already an offset there, so it's just increasing that. This would be an additional $25,000 offset from the activity fees to support activity stipends. It would include an additional $15,000 offset from the music fee, additional $45,000 offset in the bus revolving account. And then the last line, if you'll see that when we looked at our subscription costs, both by changing some things like our Zoom account, we don't need all the licenses that we've had, looking at are there subscriptions that we have that the teacher subscription is what we need, the student subscription isn't what we need in order for the students to still access the curriculum. Making those different types of adjustments and trying to consolidate different programs, we are projecting a decrease in our subscription costs by $120,828. So if we add that together, if we add the reductions and the offsets, that takes us to $1,068,553. Then we remove those additions, which takes us to $774,207, which is the balance between the FY25 projected number that we saw in the budget task force and what we're saying our recommended FY25 needs would be. Does everybody follow that so far? Okay. So we'll talk about the main revenue and expense categories. I might go quickly through here because I think you're all familiar with this, and this is something that we're going to be sharing our budget workbook with all of you more in the FinCom, and everybody will look at all those different categories. But we do have our main revenue categories we do get circuit breaker every single year, which is a partial reimbursement based on the previous year's allowable special education expenses. It is a little complicated and confusing. We can talk about it a little bit more later on the special education slide as well too. We're projecting the budgeted amount for FY25 to be $2.6 million that you'll see there. Every year we do get Grant 240, and we budget $820,000 in that amount. That has remained consistent. And then other revenue sources that you'll see at the bottom, we are projecting that we will bring in $450,000 in school choice in FY25, $800,000 for the athletics, activities, and music fees all combined, $750,000 in bus parking fees, and then early arrival fees, $350,000. And then our expense categories are these four big bucket items: salaries, operations, facilities, special education out of district, and transportation. So we've talked about this before. 80% of our budget is our salaries, and this is the breakdown of the salaries. We spend $56,402,590 in our projected salary lines and that's how these break down. I don't think I need to read those all for you. So here, when we look at our operation and facility costs, one thing that I wanted to draw your attention to, only because it was new information that Jeff Goodman, I knew that we were responsible for the treatment plants, but I didn't know that it was in 2013 that an MOU was signed between the school committee, select board, and the Board of Water Commissioners to say that the Board of Water Commissioners or the water department is taking care of all the stuff inside the building, but the school department is taking care of everything outside the building, and the school department owns those buildings, if you will, because I know that sometimes comes up. People say, well, why are we, and it is part of our agreement, and it's part of the expectations. At one point, I was anticipating that we would be able to include some preventative maintenance, which we have not been able to do. But as we've been looking at the special education costs and making the adjustments as that becomes a more real-time scenario, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. The updated utility costs, we are looking at an additional $292,239 of natural gas and electric costs. So when you look at the difference between the FY24 budget and the FY25 budget, it's about $500,000, and $292 of it is utility costs. So I just wanted to kind of share that with everybody. All right, the next. So when we are talking about our special education tuition costs here, if you look at the right side of the screen, you'll see the comparison between FY25 and FY24. That kind of helps break things down, because I'm not sure if everybody always remembers that our actual budget, the projected amount is $6.6 million. So in our general fund, we need to fund $3.2 million of that. Circuit breaker, which comes to us from the state, will reimburse $2.6 million, and then we have the $820,000 of the federal IDEA grant as well too. But when we're talking about it, it's like sometimes people don't necessarily remember all of those things that are connected that help support all of that work. And when you see it's the money, the numbers are less in FY24, but consistent. The proportion's consistent. We did update our projected numbers for next year, which is different. The FY24 projected number of students was 62 or 63. Okay, 63. Did you say? And so we're looking at a projected number of 59 students. And then transportation. So we were projecting 11%. We have received our bids, and we looked at our initial bid proposals, and it was a 12.13% increase for FY25, higher increases for 26 and 27. So we'll be looking at that that was another impact to the preventative. It's the bid price proposal that we received. We received one. We were anticipating receiving more, but we did not. And now if you look at the second bullet there is special education out of district transportation. What you'll see is the budgeted costs for FY24, $1.4 million. We are projecting 1.7 for FY25 with the increased lease vehicles and then COLA increases for our employees. So that $227,000 will be reflected there. And so our actual FY25 cost is the, well, it's $1.4 million in there. Or is that the difference? I think that's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Thank you, Jenny. I'm like, wait, nope, that's the math right there. So the difference between FY24 and it, so we're anticipating that we would be able to keep the transportation costs similar to FY24. So this is just a recap of everything that we just talked about. So again, I kept going back and forth as to what our original projected was, because there was a lot of public discussion about that. We talked about it throughout the summer. We used all these numbers, so I don't want people to get confused as to what those differences were. when we started actually develop FY25, and we're looking at the enrollment adjustments and then different efficiencies that we identified, like with transportation, where our request, the needs request, is the 7% increase. Now, everything that I'm going to talk about from here on out is not going to be anything that we're comfortable with. So that's important for people to understand that. We're going to be talking about a lot of different significant reductions. If you remember the previous slide that talked about 80% of our budget is salaries, that it's going to impact things. So we can move to the next slide, because this is where we're going to talk about the additional adjustments. So the difference between what the needs request is $70,505,124. The target to remain within the Proposition 2.5 constraints is $67,207,356. That's a difference of $3,297,768.
I just want to be super clear that we've switched into if the override fails.
Correct. Thank you for saying that, because I didn't actually say again in the presentation that in order to meet that 7%,
right,
additional funds will need to be identified, and that would be through the process of an override. So yes, so now we're talking about if the override was not supported, in order for us to remain within the 2.5 constraints, we will need to reduce $3.2 million. In order to get to a number like that, when 80% of our budget is salaries, we'll see what we're looking at. So if we can go to the next slide. So all of these are going to have different impacts. So one of the things that and they're not in any specific order too, I do want to stress that to people. We are looking at, you'll see as we put this all together, just the math involved, but they're not in any specific order. The recommendation to eliminate, we currently have 6 literacy specialists in our K-2 schools. So this recommendation would be to reduce that to 3, so that there would be 1 at each K-2 school, and there will still be 1 at the 3 to 5 schools. So there's no change in the 3 to 5 literacy specialists, but at the K-2 schools, we would reduce that number by 3. Looking at our district-wide administration, this includes restructuring our instructional support leadership to remove the position that we had established for the Director of Equity, Curriculum, and Instruction position, to remove that position, and to eliminate 2 more curriculum coordinator positions and restructure the K-5 curriculum coordinators. Currently, we have a K-2 STEM coordinator and a 3 to 5 STEM coordinator, a K-2 humanities coordinator, and a K-5 coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
They're servicing and supporting all of the teachers in all of the elementary schools. So this would be just going with 1 K-5 STEM coordinator and 1 K-5 humanities coordinator. So that's the 3.0 FTE reduction. Adjusting the intervention model at the elementary and middle school levels. This would be removing all interventions, all of the reading interventionists and math interventionists at the elementary schools and middle school level, and adding 1 academic coach at each of the elementary schools. So currently, the 2 middle schools have an academic coach who provides support primarily for executive functioning, as well as also there's a reading interventionist and a math interventionist at the middle schools. So this would be, all of the RIs and MRs would be eliminated, but we would add academic coaches. The academic coaches work a longer day and 180 days. Our interventionists don't, so there's a little bit of a balance there. Many of our RIs and MIs would be qualified to be academic coaches, and it might be something that they would be interested in taking on a different role that would provide still support in reading and math, but not just targeted in that one area. So it's not it would be a significant change to the way in which we provide support. Go ahead and move to the next. Thank you. Currently, we have one reading teacher at both middle schools who provide a reading class to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. It's a general education reading elective. This includes removing that course from both of those schools, so eliminating those reading positions at the two middle schools. And then at the bottom of the screen, we have an additional 11.4 FTEs at Westford Academy. So the impact of this that you would see on the side there would be impact to class sizes, and it would also impact elective offerings that exist. So we would look at reducing 2 FTEs in math, 2 FTEs in ELA, which, like I said, would immediately increase class sizes for the I will say the more core courses, but it would also eliminate some of the potential math electives that exist as well too. We know that social emotional support and concern is a huge thing that we've been committed to. When we look at all of the different changes, our school counselors, this recommendation includes removing 1 school counselor at WA. The other levels, it would be more challenging to remove a counselor based on the structure of the different levels, and it'd be challenging to do this at WA as well too. It would increase their caseload, so we should say class sizes, elective offerings, and caseloads, and I didn't say that, and I apologize for that. The world languages, these are all additional to what we had said earlier too, right? So an additional 1.2 FTEs of world languages. This would impact our ability to provide some of the languages, and it would definitely complicate the ability to offer all the levels of the languages that exist. Additional 1.4 in social studies. Again, same thing with class sizes and electives. An additional 2.0 in science. The additional 0.8 in VPA, which is across both visual and, VPA, visual and performing arts as well. And then there are currently 2 librarians at Westford Academy, and this would be reducing the Westford Academy to 1 full-time librarian. And then we would look at additional reductions of 4 elementary FTE positions, 3 at Abbott, 1 at the day school, which would bring at the elementary schools, based on the number of students that we have and based on the sections that currently exist, then that would bring some of the elementary classes up to 24, 25. They don't exceed that, and some of them still are staying within the 22, 23 range, because all the grades are so different that it's difficult to do that universally.
Can I just ask, because I know Abbott, the problem with Abbott is the actual physical size of the classroom. So do we have the ability to make those numbers fit into
So we are looking at that, and what you'll see is one of the things that Mr. Meyerson did was change how classrooms are being utilized.
Okay.
Which has made some adjustments. But what you'll see, if I was to run those sections through the enrollments that I showed you earlier and the way that the function will change the class sizes, that Abbott, the class sizes are still lower.
Okay.
But they're increasing, so those smaller rooms would still be crowded, right? So we've tried to keep them smaller so that in itself there was still similar, space for the students, but that would still increase. For example, I believe the 3rd grade classes, which we were trying to keep at 17, would go to 20. They wouldn't go to 22 or 24, but they'd go to 20, and some of the other grades might go up to 24. But it also might, some of that could still be a needed adjustment based on working with the principal to say, okay, maybe this grade needs to go here. So all of those reductions total $2,159,896 in staffing reductions. So if we go to the next slide, one of the other pieces there, that's the first bullet. Another piece that we talked about was the fact that in our needs request, we are saying we want to make the adjustments necessary to bring our staff to competitive pay. This would also require us to reduce our comp reserve, and so therefore we'll still meet our contractual obligations, but we would not necessarily be bringing our employees to the competitive target that we believe that they should be at based on the data. And so that would be an additional $1,032,317. We would increase the offset from our integrated preschool revolving account by $50,000, which goes very, very close to using all of that up in a way that isn't necessarily a wise way to do that. We also had included a contingency for 2 ESPs, which is our education support professionals, because that's honestly sort of that is a moving piece that we often find ourselves where we might need to hire an additional ESP midpoint in the year. So that removes that contingency. And so when you add all of those up, that takes us to the $3,297,768. So the last slide I just want people to see so that they know that we're thinking carefully about this is what that means in actual people. So not talking about the other pieces, but in people. In our initial district-wide recommendations with the reductions, including so these aren't all teachers, right? They're not all teachers, they're different staff members. It's teachers, it's drivers, it's administrators, it's ESPs, interventionists, all of our different groups. In our initial FTE reductions, it was actually 27.2 when you include the drivers and those teachers and administrators that we identified. We did have a recommendation of the additional 4.4, which is the 1 ESL teacher and the 3.4 FTEs for the 18 to 22-year-old program. The additional reductions that go in order for us to remain within the Proposition 2.5 constraints is an additional 47.4 FTEs. We're suggesting an additional 6 to try to help with the intervention support. So those are the 6 academic coaches. Thank you. So the potential total FY25 FTE reductions reflected within this presentation is a total of 64.2 staff members. If we want to go back to the slide that has the timeline on it, which is like the 3rd slide, I think.
Yeah, I'll get there.
Sorry.
Don't make us relive it.
Just close your eyes.
Seeing my live flash.
So again, we certainly, you might have questions tonight. The subcommittee, the finance subcommittee is going to be meeting on the 12th.
Yep.
To have a little bit more further discussions. Jenny's also creating the budget memo. One of the challenges that we have is the fact that every year you get like a really, really super detailed budget memo. And so she has all of that for our needs, but we have to actually recreate the whole thing in a completely different workbook in order to identify, and we wanted to make sure that we were never double counting or never mixing any of those. So then we'll have that ideally for the 12th for the subcommittee meeting, and then we'll share that with everybody on the 18th as well too. And then the town meeting. So again, everything that we had said earlier, in order for an override to pass, it has to pass twice. It would have to pass at the March 23rd town meeting, and then it would have to pass again on May 7th as a ballot question. So there are questions that people have about that.
And now might be a good time to remind people, residents might be watching at home, that that is a lot of advocacy work and education, and there is a ballot committee that will be formed to do that. And if you're interested, I can help connect you. So just email the school committee or my email, and I can help connect you with those people.
One of the things that's important, I think, for me to repeat, I've said it to staff, I think it's important for people to also remember that as once an official ballot question becomes a thing, we can't use our public resources to advocate for one side or the other. So I plan to provide as much factual information and answer questions as often as I can, and I'd be happy to speak at any group. I know the town manager, Kristen Lass, and I are planning to do presentations together as well, too, to answer questions. But it is important for people to understand that as public employees, all of the public school employees, including me, including all of our teachers and everybody, we can't use public resources to advocate for an outcome. And so some people might think, oh, well, why aren't you doing X? And so we will continue to operate within what we are allowed to do.
But the ballot committee
The ballot committee would be able to
who can advocate
specifically
for-
advocate.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
Thank you. I know, Jenny, there must be a lot of work happening.
Jenny she's done an incredible, but because she's constantly had to go back and then different questions and people ask different questions, and she'll keep doing it. And it's in order to prepare two budgets it's difficult enough with one, but she's done it with two, and so we're very grateful for even the sensitivity with which she handles everything. I think is admirable.
And the work to be able to meet both of those budget targets, but then also to communicate it,
Yeah.
both of you, all of you. This was very clear.
And I also just wanted, I think with the timeline is so important to reiterate, because we won't know until May 7th. And so that uncertainty in our buildings with our staff is really hard until May. So we want to acknowledge that.
And for families. I mean,
And
it's
for
not
families.
just staff,
Sure.
it's for our families at home too.
So are there any initial questions? I mean, I know this was just kind of the first meeting. We do have many more budget opportunities for discussion. There will be a public comment at the beginning of next meeting for anyone interested to share their thoughts or questions. Yeah, Sean?
I just have an initial question, which is, Chris, there was a good amount of discussion on class size, assuming we're looking at the 7% increase.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone go back and look at the numbers of, assuming we go the 2.5 proposition route, what that would do to class size on a macro? Because right now, like as you pointed out, we're pretty good at keeping it below. It's what, 22 and 25, right? Depending on the grade level.
So we looked at it, and that's something I can share with you more specifically on the 18th too, because I actually do have that same enrollment slide where we just looked at what our and that is a it's a live Google and so as we were adjusting potential sections at the elementary level and middle school, you can't do the same thing at the academy. So at the academy, we're looking at what our current sections are. The challenge with the academy is also that it's a student-driven schedule based on the things and so we have to live between things that we know that we might not be able to continue to do anyway, so they might not have a choice to take a specific class. But like when we talk about the languages that already exist, that's where sometimes it'll be like, well, how many students are electing for that level of the language, right? And that maybe that can be combined, and in some cases they already are combined. So there's a little bit of there's a little bit of that goes on that's not as easy to pinpoint, but that's been the work that WA has been doing to kind of look to see what might be possible and still be able to provide classes, right? So at the elementary level, though, that is a living document that I can show you as we change the numbers, the impact that it had on every single grade in each school on their class sizes.
Okay, because as someone who views this and saw the whole second half of your presentation as like a doomsday scenario type thing.
Yeah.
You know, like, for me, I think it's one thing that Westford has done really well over the years is prioritize class size, right? Like, I think it's consistent with the literature too, right? Like, it doesn't matter about building size or, you know, grade size. What matters is teacher to student ratio, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important as we move forward, right? And those of us who will be out there advocating for one particular side of this, that would be helpful data to have.
And I'll just give you one example now that kind of shows the challenge, right? Is that some of the grades they might already have a lower number of sections in that grade. And so if you go from 4 to 3, you could be changing from 22 to 27.
Right, yeah, yeah. 'Cause
Very
you have to
quickly.
essentially divide.
Whereas some of the schools, they might have more sections of a grade based on, they just had a larger percentage of that group of students in the first place. And so the difference of one section might not be that huge of an impact. And so and I can show you that on the 18th.
There's also one data point I was wondering if we could, just to, for my own kind of bigger picture information, is how many students within our district who don't necessarily attend our schools but access services. That would be an interesting number.
Yeah,
just
we
to
do
see
have that
kind of-
number. We actually, that's something we were showing, we started showing that just with our enrollment updates.
Yeah.
I didn't include it
Yeah.
here because we were
Yeah.
just looking at
Just to
sections,
double check
but we
it,
did,
yeah.
that number we even shared, I think, in November, so we can
Yeah.
we can kind of add that in again.
Yeah, that would be helpful, thank you.
Any last thoughts for tonight? Questions?
I'll have to think about.
Okay. Fortunately, thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll move on to the personnel update.
Sure, the personnel update that's listed is self-explanatory in terms of staff members who are coming and going. You can see that many of the new hires have been for long-term substitute support that we've required, whether a teacher might be on FMLA or any other kind of a long-term leave. We are still very much still looking for substitute teachers across the board. We've just updated our substitute application form, and we will be pushing that out at the end of the week in the weekly communication. Also substitute nurses. We were quite pleased that we were able to onboard about 6 new people last week, so that's promising that we are finding staff members, and we are looking for just one more ESP at Westford Academy, so we've come a long way in being able to staff up.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mari and Chris, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you.